Greetings and welcome back to another discussion on my channel. Many of you might know Red Pill Germany. He has his own channel. He's a physicist, and he is our resident expert on German politics, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. I guess originally we'd wanted to do this the previous month when the German election had taken place, but obviously I was moving and I'm actually still in the throes of dealing with that bureaucracy, and it just doesn't end. And he had stuff to do, so we are going to talk about that now. And I think also maybe include some of the other things. I mentioned that maybe I might do a kind of a video on the housing issue. I don't know if it really warrants a separate video, but we could definitely talk about the housing market in Germany and how it's been affected by various things due to policies and politics. So yes, I'm going to welcome Red Pill Germany back to the discussion. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much, Stardust. Hi, it's a pleasure to be back here again on your channel, and looking forward to the conversation. Yeah.
So, the strange thing about the election was not that shockingly some new party won the majority. That's not what happened. Although, but the funny thing was, for a lot of people, particularly on the left, and I'll mention this at the beginning, that when the election results came in, a friend of mine in the United States who is studying right now modern German history, his professor, who's very left-leaning, basically said I was very concerned about the results. And there was some reason, that being that, surprisingly or not so surprisingly, the so-called AfD got a decent amount of votes, enough to show that they're sort of making progress. And this progress seems to have worried a lot of people, or worries a lot of people, even though the traditional powers in they continue to exist. So maybe we could start with some commentary on that.
Yeah, definitely. So it is plain to see, I guess, that the AfD did not replace Angela Merkel's CDU. Yeah, they have a 12.7% outcome, I think, that they had. Yeah. Below 13. I don't know the exact number anymore, but it doesn't matter. So a lot of people on my YouTube channel, for example, they commented, "Oh, only 12%. Germany's lost. That was the last chance. Merkel got 30 plus again. How is that possible? What must happen before you guys learn something?" But to me, actually, and I always said that, and anything north of 10% is actually a great result for such a new party. And the point was not to kick Merkel out, because if you know anything about this representative parliamentary system that we have, especially a system where you don't have just two gigantic bloc parties like in the US and the UK, for example, but we're getting more towards a system like in Italy, actually, where you have a multitude of small factions. We used to have two big blocs that in most cases had to form a coalition with one smaller member of the parliament, the one other faction, so that traditionally it used to be the CDU, the Conservative Party, the centrist Conservative Party that is now headed by Merkel. They appreciated, or they preferred, let's say, a coalition with the Liberal Party, more economically liberal, smaller taxes, smaller government, at least officially, yeah. And the Social Democrats, they since the 80s, they liked the coalition. Before they had a coalition with the Liberal Party also, but since the 80s they preferred the Green Party. So now it's not so clear anymore. So this too big and too small, so four-party system, yeah, is replaced now by a multi-party system, where you have from the eastern part of Germany, you still have the leftover of the SED, the Communist Unitary Party, or Unity Party, the People's Party, and now they call themselves Die Linke, so they're the communists. Of course, you still have the liberals and the Greens, but you also have the AfD now, because the CDU under Merkel, was basically transformed into a Green/Social Democratic Party. So the AfD's party program, and yeah, it's a newly formed party, so a lot of people want to jump on the bandwagon, so to speak. A lot of crazy fringe elements try to find a new home in this party and to find a strong advocacy group there. And the same thing could be observed actually for the Green Party in the 80s. There were strange and crazy people, and they haven't denounced all of them, by the way, but no one holds the Green Party as a whole accountable anymore for the weird beliefs that those, for example, pedophile advocates had in the early 80s. Yeah? And now the AfD has to deal with all that stuff, but if you look at the mainstream line in the AfD, they pretty much have a program and they have ideas that the CDU had in the 80s. So they are a conservative party from a couple of decades ago. They're nothing outlandish, they're nothing crazy, they're definitely not fascists. Many of them lean to libertarian ideas, some of them more to traditional conservative ideas, but what they all have in common is that they want to strengthen the German economy, that they want to strengthen national identity, and they are opposed to a European Union that is more like the Soviet Union. So and this was the party was originally a Eurosceptic party, so they didn't like the transfer payments, all this European Stability Fund stuff, where we basically give a lot of money to southern European countries to stabilize them, because they cannot keep up with this low interest currency that the low inflation currency, that the euro is. This answer was maybe all over the place, but this is generally how I see the issue. So now it is all too easy, of course, for left-wing elements, which are the mainstream now, to just call them Nazis, which is the go-to response when you don't have any arguments, I think. So all these people should watch less Indiana Jones movies and maybe less tabloid press or something. It's misrepresented a lot abroad, I think. The AfD is nothing that one needs to be afraid of. They are just like Helmut Kohl was, and Helmut Kohl was a respected statesman, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's very much indicative of the shift in our times, where even 20 years ago, certain political positions and policies were regarded as within some sort of normal spectrum, even within a centrist type of spectrum of left and right, but effectively within center. Now, where things have gone so far left that you could argue that some of the AfD stuff is really just right of center. It's not even right in a lot of ways, I think.
It has a lot to do with labeling things, because in the 80s it was always the prime directive of the Conservative Party that there must never be a conservative party, there must never be a party politically to the right of the CDU or CSU, right? Because back then, to the right of them would have meant probably extremely nationalistic, almost fascist. But the thing is, they moved to the center and even beyond the center to the left. So now there is a party that is like the Conservative Party from 20 years ago, and now they say, oh, there must never be a party to our right, because that would mean fascism. But this kind of thinking, these kind of standards, they changed the goalposts, so to speak. This is thinking from 20 years ago, but we are not living 20 years ago anymore right now. So I think they become a victim of labels.
It's interesting as well. I mean, I think this applies also to the generational gap, and with that, of course, technological advancements, that the shift in the perception of politics and society at large has occurred so rapidly in recent years that it's hard to keep up. Where that, I'd say 100 years ago, a difference of 20 years wasn't necessarily enormous. Now, everything means something completely different. We live in and I think it's just reflective of the culture in general. So the idea of memes that can literally spring out of nothingness within a day, and then all of a sudden a week later everyone's using a certain meme in a certain context, and when did this come out? And nobody really knows, but everyone's using it, something like that. So I think it's the same thing. Well, it's the same pattern in operation, that things just shift really rapidly, and then what something means one day doesn't necessarily mean something the next day. Of course, I agree with you. I think people, the kind of alarmist thinking, I think it's intentional. When politicians and just normal people say, "Oh, we're really worried about the AFD and what could happen," and I think there's another thing that there's a kind of a history going on here. I think people tend to ignore history these days a lot, but the circumstance, say comparing 2017 with 1920s Germany, about 100 years ago, completely different circumstances. The world has changed, Europe has changed. You could say for the worse, but whatever. Even if there was some drift in a direction, something like that, it would fundamentally have to be different, because this isn't 1920s Germany. This isn't the era of 20th century fascism. And given how rapidly things travel on the internet, if somebody openly advocated for fascism, at least in the mainstream, they'd be laughed off the stage. Sure, there are some people on the internet think fascism is a great thing, whatever, but it's just it might just be because the shifting of goalposts and what was extreme back then is not only unthinkable today, but sort of right of center thinking is regarded as extreme. In this context, I was listening to a Jordan Peterson conversation with a psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, and he's liberal, he created this thing called the Heterodox Academy, where you get a bunch of mostly academics from both left and right traditions, and to get together to sort of stop the madness. But I think it's just so easy just to shut down people by just labeling them, as you said, they're Nazis or whatever. There are people, it seems, that legit think 20th century or German fascism is a great thing. In fact, I'll probably see comments in the comment section like that occasionally. But
I don't think they are coming from Germany most of the time. But
well, they're not probably come from Germany, and nobody. I just don't think that would ever have mainstream appeal. Not in the circumstances we live in today.
But what one has to bear in mind is that fascism is a very, very strong, very effective tool. And this is, I think, Stefan Molyneux had a conversation with some right-wing guy or something, and the conversation was rational, I think, until the point that this right-wing person said that government is a tool. And Molyneux completely flipped out, and he said, "Oh, you cannot compare government to a hammer, because government is people, and a hammer is a hammer." Yeah, right. But an organizational form, or a way in which a society deals with politics or with policy, with their affairs, can be described as a tool. Institutions can be seen as a tool, and it depends on the environment. In war times, for example, in time of extreme danger, such a system has its measurable benefits, and that's something one needs to bear in mind. Otherwise, I think, it's dangerous to underestimate the potency of that system.
Well, I agree with you. It's hard to look at 20th century fascism in general, for most people at least, with some sort of objectivity. There's obviously a lot of political pressure to view it in a certain way, but to say outright that it did nothing, and depends on what you define as positive, or accomplished nothing, certainly, no one would disagree that it's an incredibly powerful unifying force, but
it all comes at the cost of other things. And I give you another example. For example, central planning, which led then to communism, was a result from the war economy of the German Empire in the First World War. Now, in the First World War, the Allies created a big blockade, so we didn't get stuff through anymore. We had to recycle everything. Everything from rubber to textiles to metal, everything was collected and evaluated according to its use for war purposes. And that was the only purpose of the economy back then. Of course, it comes at the cost of other things, but for that single purpose, surviving during a blockade in a war on many fronts. This system was the best, and we held out for years, and we invented, by the way, the process to make nitrogen from air instead of importing salpeter. I don't know how you call it in English, but the stuff you need for gunpowder. Yeah, it came from Chile, I think, and it didn't go through the Atlantic blockade, so it spurred innovation, and it was a system that was optimized to keeping this nation alive. But it sucks in times of peace, of course. Yeah, and what the Soviets then did is they applied a wartime economic system that was optimized for surviving a blockade. They applied that to the normal peacetime. Yeah, that is of course nonsense, but a very strong tool in that specific situation.
Yeah, and I think, but there's just too much. Well, first off, one of the reasons why I don't think that you'd get something like that now is because, I mean, that's why I say it's sort of ahistorical to think that at least that type of fascist regime, or for that matter in Italy, or really any place in Europe, could come back. Certainly not in Germany, because how did German fascism emerge and become the dominant force for a while? Well, go back to World War I, the defeat, the Treaty of Versailles, the reparations, and a depressed economy. I mean, and basically a country that, let's face it, isn't really entirely German anymore now compared to back then when it was very German. Still had a kind of a sense of German consciousness, if you want to call it that. Today, it's not even clear. I mean, sure, if you go by sort of alt-right definitions, a German is a white guy who's German, but in the sort of more normie thing, what the hell is a German? I've asked a Norwegian friend what he considers a Norwegian and whatever, and so I think the circumstances that could give rise to that type of, I mean, there would be some people attached to that or would find that good, but by and large, I just don't think most of the population could get behind that.
Yeah,
because
so I think
too disorganized. Yeah.
So I think a lot of people would agree with the notion that illegal immigrants, especially when they commit crimes here, they must be kicked out immediately, and especially also other migrants or people with a migratory background who have German passports. They think like that, for example, because they came here legally. So there are many Italian Germans, there are many Polish Germans and whatsoever, and to the alt-right or ethnic definition of German, they're not Germans, but it would be extremely hard and foolish, by the way, to kick those people out. And nobody, to my knowledge, wants to kick those people out. But if you ask somebody from Serbia, if you ask someone from Croatia, from Italy, from Poland, who integrated very well here, they say they're voting for AfD, and they want these illegals gone tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the great confusion. That I still think it's pretty mysterious why, going back 2 years now, why this sort of Wir schaffen das and mass immigration thing was even a thing. I mean that I just find it baffling, frankly. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I wouldn't have done it, but you can either try to explain it by Angela Merkel for once wanted to be loved by the people, not be seen as some emotionless machine, or you can say she is a Soviet kind of implant here who was practicing for this precise moment for all her life and tries to sabotage Germany from the inside.
Yeah, but I mean,
other explanations exist too, but
it's what I think is interesting about our times or the era we're living in is, and you can't even have a discussion like this where you say, well, look, the fascism of that sort isn't likely because of the following factors, and it's a different historical. You can't even say anything like that. I mean, everything is so drama ridden and romanticized either in a super positive way and a negative. You see this on both sides. I mean, you see the people, fascism, worst thing ever tends to come from the left, and you get these people who think that fascism, particularly German fascism, was the greatest thing that ever happened to Germany. And it's you get these kind of these, I would call them romantics, political romantics, but they really pull either far left or well, you want to call it far right. And then just people who just don't want to. I think the Germans don't really like talking about politics. You'll never really hear them talk about that in a public setting. They tend to talk about their lives or whatever.
We used to have something called the Stammtisch, and now
I remember learning German. It was like they'd say, because this was years ago, when I was a young man. Are you going to the Stammtisch so we could practice our German? Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So nowadays there are Stammtische too, but it's different from what it used to be. So now if you are in some meetup group, let's say you're a hiking group, and there is once a month there is the hiking Stammtisch, and you talk about gear and boots and backpacks and whatnot and weather and tours. But originally the Stammtisch was a gathering where in the village the men normally, later on women too, but originally it was men, they came together, they had a closed table. Sometimes in the pub there was even like a little curtain or something, or a side wall that could be, or a room separator that could be put in place, so they could discuss, and they discussed mostly economics and politics. But since the 80s there was a cultural war against the Stammtisch. Everything related to Stammtisch was Nazi and right-winged and male and evil. So now nobody dares to have a Stammtisch unless it's about innocent things like what the coolest hiking gear is and what tour one could do next summer in the mountains. But the original meaning of Stammtisch as a place where the men of the community come together and discuss stuff and form an opinion, that disappeared.
Yeah, and something I've always found fascinating in the wake of World War II has been the very distinct, I guess you could call it, Bearbeitung, sort of working through of the Vergangenheitsbewältigungsproblem. Vergangenheitsbewältigung. But I mean, even Vergangenheitsbewältigung is kind of, it's not, you don't really hear that in Austria. I was about to say that there's Austria continued to have open fascists after World War II. They didn't. It's as if for them World War II barely happened.
It was all the Germans. Yeah.
well, yeah. I mean, it was obviously part of that is shifting blame, but I also think that I find this fascinating because it seems that on a cultural level, in theory, both being very similar in theory, the Austrians went down a completely different route. The Austrians never, and I did live there years ago, otherwise I've visited a few times, and I've known a few. If you go to a place like Linz, which I think is the third biggest city in Austria, off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but, Linz, whatever, I don't think you're going to find these sort of rabid liberals that you might find in a place like Berlin or Munich or whatever. It's just a different mentality. And I often wondered why Austrians, it's not really me saying it's right or wrong either way, but why Austrians have absorbed and perceived World War II and the aftermath so differently, apart from, just shifting blame and saying, well, it was all the Germans, okay, it was an Austrian guy, whatever. Why... Vergangenheitsbewältigung, by the way, is this sort of literary question of coming to terms with the past. I might have mentioned this a few times in the past, but anyway, why the Vergangenheitsbewältigungsfrage became such a thing in Germany, but to my knowledge, apart from maybe some academic circles, at the level of the ground, people, just normal people, at the level of the folk, never was an issue. I'm curious because you obviously are Bavarian in origin. So, any thoughts on, because Bavaria and Austria have a lot in common in a way that, I don't know, Lower Saxony or North Rhine.
The Bavarian dialect is also, I think they're one dialect group, I think.
Yes, they are. Yes,
there must be a
connection.
Correct. Yeah. But I am from a different tribe. I'm not even a Bavarian. I'm a Frank. So
right.
But still,
okay.
So I can only speculate on that. That's a very interesting question. So first of all, I I can assume that it is the way you say. I don't even know if Vergangenheitsbewältigung has been much less of an issue there. I have no idea if that's true. But if it were true, I could maybe imagine that they're more traditionalist. They're instead of a part of Vienna, for example, they're mostly living in rural areas and small towns, just like southern Germans also. And even within German, you have a west-east, north-south gradient when it comes to these political questions. So, maybe a more conservative, more traditionalist mentality overall.
To add to that, and my experience with Austrians as well, that I mean, everybody hates the capital city dwellers in every country.
They call it just die Stadt, the city.
Yeah,
right?
die Stadt, yeah. Well, that's what they say in New York State, too. We're going to the city, as opposed to... New York State's pretty big. It's the size of the Bundesstaat, but we're going to the city.
Same disease, huh?
Yeah, but the Viennese in particular are really despised and loathed by everybody who... Because when I was living in Austria, it was in Graz, which was the second biggest city. But the whole thing in the Steiermark, is that they just fucking hate the Viennese. They're viewed as sort of snobs, and I think that probably is the case, because Vienna is a relatively small city. It's about between 1 million and 2 million people, and then everyone else is, I wouldn't say rural necessarily, because there's Linz and Graz, but just it's definitely a different mentality. Whereas there are large major cities in Germany, and then if you want to consider the Ruhrpott is like just one gigantic city, in some sense, it might have something to do with that Austria has remained kind of pseudo-rural in a way. Also, I think Austrians have always struck me as being more pragmatic than Germans are have been, yes, in terms of the tradition of thought. I don't think you have so for everyone's saying, Deutschlandland, der Denker und Henker, that never was ascribed to Austria. I can't think of it back to my literary studies years ago. Austria is very sort of pragmatic. There were some wacky theories occasionally coming from certain people there, but for the most part, when you think of a kind of abstract intellectual tradition, even in the realm of physics, obviously, it's all north of Austria. Austria is sort of this strange place. I don't know. I wonder if that has something to do with it. They're just sort of, I hate, it's going to sound horrible, but sort of in some sense less intellectual in a cultural sense. Hard to say.
I wouldn't go that far, because Austrians are actually pretty intellectual. If you look at their musicians, their artists, their history.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
But also in the realm of science, they are actually pretty advanced. I would say they're on par, if not even better than us Germans on average in this respect.
Yeah,
it's a powerful mixture, I think, of this neurotic, morbid city life that you have in Vienna, and then more rural areas. And the best physicists from the US, for example, are from the Midwest. So I don't think coming from a rural area is a hindrance to becoming.
Yeah, I wasn't arguing that, but that's a good.
I know, but I think maybe in Austria, in these terms, you have the best mixture you can hope for. So I made very good experiences. No quantitative data, but this is what I think.
I like every time I've been to Austria, I've always kind of enjoyed my time there. Although it depends. Sometimes it depends. Sometimes they don't like Germans. Understandable, perhaps not. I just find it one of these fascinating questions. I'm sure people who are better informed historically, who have actually spent the time investigating this sort of paradox, I guess, if you will, that these two countries, which both seem to participate in the events of World War II, with very different attitudes in retrospect. But yeah, it's also Austria is much more nationalistic. I think that's been the case since.
I also don't know how the occupation really looked like there. I know that they had to be neutral after World War II, and that was actually, in retrospect, the best for them. While we were really in NATO, and nuclear weapons have been stationed or are still stationed on our territory, so that might also have.
I mean, yeah,
taken
Germany
down a different road.
Yeah. Germany was definitely sort of political ground zero in a way, because it was divided up, and effectively West Germany was a kind of territory of the United States, and for the longest period of time, just as the DDR was a territory of the Soviet Union. So that there had to be, just I think, in terms of the Realpolitik, much more political interest in those places, whereas Austria was a sort of tiny place with little to no Soviet influence, at least comparatively speaking. But it's very interesting. I think when you think about it, how different these places are, even though they're both German-speaking countries. Also, that an AfD party in Austria wouldn't cause a boo. I mean, nobody would really care. I mean,
they have the FPÖ.
Well, the FPÖ, and historically,
much older and many votes.
Yeah, but the FPÖ
maybe forming a coalition soon there. Yeah.
The FPÖ had actually, at some point in time, its history. Entschuldigung.
Bless you. Gesundheit.
Actual fascist people who thought. Not many, but they occasionally had actual. I mean, that's how different Austria is in terms of the politics. And the FPÖ, I think, is in many ways obviously much more further along the right end spectrum. But then again, it's Austria, so it's just sort of normal until you go to Vienna. Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
It's a bit of a detour there, but I've always found this distinction to be very interesting. I should really go back to Austria to at least visit at some point in time. It's been years, yeah. So, but what does it mean? Getting back to the original question, the fact that because people often cite 10% as this sort of critical mass number or percentage for anything, right? So what does it mean in your eyes or in your thoughts that the AfD got as far as it did this previous election? Do you think that it actually is a possibility at some point in time in the future that basically that the majority parties get displaced and the AfD takes over?
Well, I think the coming years form a critical time. It could be a turning point from now on if they can deliver or if they will be useless. So first of all, there is a 5% hurdle for our parliament. If you don't get more than 5% of the votes, you're out. Yeah, and the seats are distributed among the other parties. So you need to have more than 5%. That's important. And so I think they can now use the parliament as a stage for actual opposition work, like they already do in the state parliaments. I think they're doing great work there, and they're asking the right questions, and they have to take the pressure to the government, whatever government it will be, and ask uncomfortable questions and be, so to speak, what's the right word here? A representative of the people, like what they are as members of parliament. But I think they have the chance now to not be representing maybe large corporations or globalist ideas, but really represent the people, be an advocate for the people from their constituency where they have been elected. And you can see in Saxony, for example, there are 2 free states in Germany. They had kings back then, that is Bavaria and that is Saxony. And while they have their own constitutions, and in Saxony, the AfD, in many places is the largest party already, and it could become the People's Party of Eastern Germany. But it all depends on what happens in the next year or in the following years. If they can deliver, if they can make that transition from this protest party to be taken really serious by the people, and to not lose themselves in these battles between different factions and wings within the party, but to stick to their program, which I think is a reasonable program, which has a lot of potential for further success in the future if they just don't screw up now. There are many pitfalls. Many people want them to fail. Many people will try to quote mine or to especially in the media to portray them in a bad way, and they have to be careful as hell now. They have to be really careful right now.
Yeah, and I actually know people in real life, Germans, who, Lord bless their souls, they just are left leaning. They just think it's good to take in immigrants. It's good to, I don't know, this is the way they think. It's not even a question. In the case of the people I know, I don't even think it's a question of virtue signaling. They actually think it's just a good thing. It's good moral practice, whatever.
I think it's a lot of misunderstood Christianity together with these, social democrat mainstream ideas. It's a toxic concoction of the German mainstream, I think. Especially Christianity has been hijacked to a degree where I don't really recognize it anymore, and say as you will, Christianity is still a very strong factor, but what is sold to people as Christianity these days has nothing to do with Christianity anymore. It is just social democratic nonsense.
The
idea that it's by default Christian to just help everyone. Nowhere in the Bible can you see a phrase, just give all your money away, help everyone regardless. You should give to the poor, yes, but should you exchange your own population for people who can possibly feed themselves even in the future? So I don't think this is Christianity. I don't think this is mercy or welfare in the Christian sense. That's just suicide.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Just it's going to be difficult convincing people. And although, to be fair, in the conversation most recently that I had with left-leaning friends a couple of weeks ago, he admitted that things have really gone too far in a lot of ways in terms of polarizing things as absolute evil or whatever. So I think they're actually, and this is something that Jonathan Haidt mentioned in his conversation with Jordan B. Peterson, that there are people who are liberal left who are beginning to recognize that there's a kind of separate faction of the left that's just utterly insane. The kind, when people say left these days, I think there is a distinction. I don't want to be completely biased in my view here. There are people who are left of center who aren't they think X is good, and maybe someone who is right of center doesn't, but they're not completely insane about things and thinking, well, for example, there's no such thing as biology or biological sex or whatever. There are people like that on the left. It's just they might be getting shouted down by the more extreme voices. But I get this feeling, and this is a prediction that he made, and I kind of agree with him, that because things are coming ahead and coming to a force so quickly that maybe there's going to be pushback within the left against the left. I already see some of it. Left-leaning people I know or I'll see in media just thinking that this is just utterly insane, what's going on. And
well, too little too late, I assume. So I think this is backpedaling now because they see that their blade became blunt from overuse. And I don't think that they came to see the light or something. They just see that they don't get what they want by saying the buzzwords that they used to. I don't think that they really come to terms with reality. They might make some concessions against to distance themselves from extreme SJWs here and there, but I think it's a grave mistake if conservatives or right-wing people would now be so happy and finally some woke and sane left people. Let's discuss with them. Well, okay, of course you can discuss with them, but I wouldn't be too friendly with them. I would treat them with a polite caution and distance, and still see them as adversaries. But I don't trust them. I don't trust them one bit.
It really depends. I mean, I guess you have to, in terms of the guy that Peterson was talking about, Jonathan Haidt. He's basically he's an academic, but he's not. I mean, definitely that's about a good conversation for the audience. If you haven't, I'm kind of hit or miss with Jordan Peterson. But that was a good conversation. I mean, he's a guy who recognizes certain biological realities about people and actually studies the origins and roots of tribalism, and he's liberal. But, I mean, there's that type of person versus someone who's just sort of, I guess, paying lip service to it's really extreme. Some people are just, I mean, his big concern, and I thought that was a very interesting point, and I had not actually thought about that, so that's why I learned something in the conversation, that in the United States, in the academic scene at least, up until now, it had never been the case where people, particularly from the conservative side, actually thought universities were a bad thing. But increasingly now, there's a perception there, whether it's real or justified, I think partially justified, obviously, that university education and universities in general are a bad thing. And many of the really good universities are public universities. I mean, forget the politics, but the University of California, State University of New York, University of Virginia, I mean, really good institutions that are publicly funded, University of Michigan. Well, what happens when the conservatives, particularly red state majorities, begin to think that university just as an institution is a bad thing that produces bad ideas? Well, that's potentially very, very damaging to universities in general, and specifically public universities. And so that's actually a growing concern that he mentioned. I'd never really given, I have to be honest, much thought to that. If there's a legitimate perception, real or justified or otherwise, that universities are just sort of the tools of Satan, being hyperbolic, but whatever, then maybe something could happen, and funding gets drastically reduced and what have you. So that's why I think at least in academia, people who are kind of sane liberals, if you want to call them that, are waking up, if only for survival purposes, to think, well, maybe everyone's taking these things too far.
Yeah. I think they're also seeing that the impacts are getting closer. For example, in Japan, you've seen that Japan started they stopped funding for liberal arts and social science faculties. A lot of people say, this is anti-intellectual, but I think Japan doesn't think that universities are a bad institution. They just think that they need to be reformed, and that these cancers that have been growing within our own universities, they must be cut out. And this is what Japan is doing now, and this will happen here too. For example, when I hear that most or the highest degree of people with a university degree who voted for the Green Party, and then people say, that means the Green Party is good because smart people vote for them, so they have the best program. Well, nowadays many people start realizing that university degree doesn't equal university degree, and even though they don't make the distinction in these polls, people who read that then start saying, I can imagine what kind of graduates vote for the Green Party, right? Sure, they have a university degree, but Aaron Clary, rightfully so, calls them worthless degrees. And in the past it might have been different, and there was value to these subjects, but nowadays they are an incubation center for little devils. I would go that far, training ground for little Marxists, and maybe these sane liberals see that this will not go on like this, and they're attacked themselves now by
that's the whole point,
by the ghosts or the spirits that they called, and they see that it becomes dangerous now, so they it's a Hail Mary effort to change, to stop this train. You know?
Yeah, I think Reactionary Expat had a good expression of sort of the pets eating their masters, or the pets eating their own.
Yeah, or the magician's apprentice, or how is this story called? Like the Zauberlehrling or something, you know? Die Geister, die ich rief. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's effectively, I mean, I don't get all literary, sort of the Faustian bargain, right? You know, or even playing with fire, basically, that you push certain ideas on people. And in fact, Jonathan Haidt, it was interesting, he mentioned that well into the 90s, he had been unaware of his own liberal biases until I think it was in India. He spent 3 or 4 months there on research and realized certain things and came back. And now he's basically apolitical. I mean, technically, he's never voted Republican, but he just sees sort of conservatism and liberalism as spectrums of human psychology with relationships to tribal. It's much more analytical than he used to be. And I think, yeah, they do eat their own. I think Sam Harris interviewed a guy who was a medical doctor as well as a professor who very liberal, and how he was getting shouted down by his own students. And I guess it's a bit to further push the analogy. It's imagine your old faithful hound dog, and all of a sudden, he's biting your leg, and you don't even know how to react because it's just
exactly.
I thought this was my dog. He's not going to attack me, but so you're sort of paralyzed, and people are just terrified of responding to them. And here's another interesting thesis that he offered that, it's more than a thesis. I think he did some pretty rigorous analysis. So, particularly in the social sciences, as well as psychology, where he cited some crazy numbers of something like, in terms of liberals, conservatives, at least in the United States, of 14-1, that what had happened was the people who went on to these professorships, they were the children of, say, the 60s and 70s, right? The war protests and love and all that, and civil rights. And the older people who retired, say in the 90s, were more they were liberal, but to a large degree. I think it was much smaller, like 4-1 rather than 14-1. And what happened is that entire generation got itself sort of nested into academia, and then all of a sudden, this mass discrepancy in terms of political views, where it's actually quite dangerous to not, at the very least, pay lip service to certain liberal dogma or left-leaning doctrines. But yeah, it is, I think, a case of the pet eating the pet eating the master, or however you want to put it. They don't even know how to deal with it. And the thing I get that I'm at a loss for, because I've listened to some of these interviews, is how some of these people think that they can still reason with these crazies. If you just, a good argument with them, and you put forth a good argument, and everything will be fine. But they can't. I mean, these people are lunatics. And Haidt further drew that a lot of this stuff almost has a pseudo-religious aspect to it. This idea of sort of sweeping certain types of people off a campus. It's like purification almost. It sounds crazy, but when you actually listen to how he described it, it sounds very plausible. And basically, this extreme left-wing thinking has become a type of pseudo-religion with rituals. Some of these people they go to campus, they chant things. I think it was for Charles Murray. I forgot what they had a rhyming chant that went on. It's not even political anymore. It's just a sort of ersatz religion, effectively.
Yeah, and it gives them a sense of community.
Yeah, well, that's what religion also does. It's a really powerful force of community. Yeah,
it's all that, definitely.
So, it might be, as you put it, too little, too late. I think it might just be, past bedtime, and they're just going to stay up now, and the adults won't be able to get them back into bed. They're just going to stay up the whole night and cause a lot of mischief and problems. I haven't been in the German university scene for a long time, but I imagine it's caught on here too. In terms of young
especially
people.
If there is a conservative professor, for example. Every now and then you read that Antifa-like groups, they they storm into his lecture, shout him down. And they do that for weeks, and months. And at some point, even though that professor did nothing wrong, and he has tenure, but the university, gets rid of him. They say then, oh, he's a hazard to the students, but the thing is, not he is doing the violence, not he is attacking or shouting down anybody, not he sabotages lectures, but those lefties, and they just don't have the moral strength to call the cops and carry these hippies out there, or communists basically. So in the end, these bullying tactics are successful in Germany. Right now, I think it's the University of Leipzig that wants to get rid of a law professor, I think, because he said that he wants a Germany that stays German just as well as he wants a China or a Thailand to stay Chinese or Thai. Is that so far out there? He's also against mass migration, obviously, and that is enough for some Antifa-like group to shout him down regularly, and then the media interviews concerned students, of course, who don't feel safe at this lecture any longer, and they're so worried and they're troubled, and this can't be true in Germany. We have to get rid of this man. He's evil. And then this shit show will go on for a month, and then they find some little thing he said in the past, or they find some legal loophole, and the guy is fired.
Yeah. Well, I think Peterson said in that interview as well that if that had happened to him, or were to happen to him, he would just walk out and stop lecturing. I mean, or at the very least call the campus authorities or whatever.
But this is old history in Germany. I mean, since the 60s, that stuff is commonly happening. I mean, this is how this outrageous liberal ratio is accomplished at universities. A lot of conservative lecturers or professors have been purged in Germany actively. And then, when the students see that, when they want to plan their career, they will think twice, before they become professors. And it was the same with me. I mean, I could have become a professor easily, but I just didn't want to pursue a career where I would have to really hide how I feel and how I think from all my colleagues. And when you're in academia, it is really like a club. It's like a mafia. So you and the people in your university, and also all over the world in your academic discipline, you see them all the time at conferences. You prepare conferences together. You work together when you put out a paper, or when you are the referee for a journal article or something. You deal with the same kind of people for all your life. It's like a little clique. And depending on the discipline you're in, this clique is larger or very cozy and familiar and small. And you can't hide that. There is no way. You go drinking with these people. They know your friends. They know your family. You can't hide that. And I thought it would be. I mean, I'm a very good chameleon. I can do that, but I don't want to. So first of all, I don't want to, and I don't want to be forced to do that for 40 years. Yeah. And maybe I could do it for 10, but I couldn't do it for 20 maybe. At some point something leaks and then you're screwed. So I thought, I have all this ability and I have great education and what do I do with that now? And I thought, well, the industry is the place for me, because at least they leave you alone there. It already started there too, with some political education campaigns. Yeah, but in the physics department, in academia, it was rampant also, and in the industry it starts now too, but to a much lesser degree, because in the industry they're interested in the work I do, and they need the stuff that I do. They are dependent on my services, so they leave me alone. Yeah, they don't try to brainwash me. But in this very familiar circle in academia in which you are, the private and the professional, it merges, and in that environment, with this liberal bias and with the police and the courts not really enforcing the law any longer, I thought it would have been foolish to pursue a career in academia. So I left, and so all the conservative centrist people leave, and then you're left with crazy liberals, even in physics.
Yeah. Well, then there's also the problem. I've seen this in the public sphere in the United States. You're talking about physics. I don't know what it was. There was some big Trittensfettnäpfchen. I'm trying to think of the English term. It doesn't really occur to me at the moment. I guess a public fuck up, blunder, screw up. Lawrence Krauss. He's sort of like a physicist for the public. You know him probably, right? And I think Gad Saad was of all people called him. He just said something moronic or idiotic, and a lot of these guys, these science guys, we call them science guys, right?
Science
guys, yeah. they're really big on virtue signaling.
Oh yeah.
Dawkins, I think, has been the biggest failure. This was a guy for years and years. He went on about evidence and how important the truth is, but allows himself to get held up by feminists. Joined in the condemnation of Watson when he was stripped of his Nobel Prize and all this stuff. And I mean, clearly, for example, Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist.
Did he join Atheism Plus?
I don't know. He didn't. I think that was a bit too much for him. But
the feminist version.
He wants to maintain his reputation, and this is the thing is.
They're tortured creatures. I pity them. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, what really creates a kind of ressentiment in me with regards to Dawkins is he used to cite these great stories of scientific minds conceding their mistakes and errors after somebody revises their theories and I've been wrong these 30 years. Thank you for correct. And here's a guy who's just going along with the program so he can maintain his reputation until he dies. And then, he can't fuck up anymore after that. But huge failure. Because an evolutionary biologist who doesn't, who said all things should be studied, and then he just goes along with the liberal program. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's left-leaning, but he never struck me as a kind of dogmatic left-leaning guy up until recently. And even then, I just think he's just afraid of condemnation. Dawkins has been, of all the science guys, public figures, the most disappointing public figure of anybody, because he knows certain things, obviously, and he does. And then there are the rest of them, Krauss and some others. He's sort of, I guess, advocates for the public. They're just doing a huge disservice to everybody, going along with the dogma of our time. And as you pointed out, what's left? Just a bunch of fucking loonies. I mean, maybe some people that can teach you about quantum theory, and then they'll lecture you about how Trump is Satan incarnate at the same time.
Precisely. And what really annoys me also about science discourse in general is that science is like the argument that beats everything. A scientist said X, Y.
Argument from authority,
Yeah, people think that scientists are these saints and stuff, but from 20 to 15 years working in science and technology, I have to say, I trust them less and less. Actually, I mean, I was in there. I saw what's going on, all the fraud that they commit, and all the pressure also that they're exposed to. Yeah, they need to get funding. They worry about their reputation so much because these people, they have really big egos. I mean, you can become a small, mediocre researcher maybe without an ego, but if you want to be a top professor, you don't do that for the money, probably. Yeah, you do that because you have this big ego. You want to be liked by people. You want to be appreciated. You want to be the smartest guy in the room, and you want everyone to agree with you and say how brilliant you are. And that would all go away once they say the wrong thing. And in many cases, it's a cult that they create around their persona, and their ego is dependent on that. And not only the ego, as I said, it's money, it's state funding, it's government funding. I mean, here in Germany, most of the money for these professors comes directly from the state or the federal government, or from some organizations that are basically belonging to the German state, and they can't say anything out of line. They just can't.
I agree with you. From an outside perspective of a non-scientist, it does seem pretty corrupt. I continue to cite the story of my father as this Hungarian friend who about, I think it was a decade ago now, was actively trying to get a professorship. He ended up giving up and, well, moving back to Hungary, also for personal reasons. But in any event, he had some somewhat controversial theory in the field of geophysics, and some people actually accepted it and thought it was good, but man, it was just fought against so hard. Even if it had been true, because I think just big egos were involved. And so I think ego's always been involved in science. We look at the battles between Leibniz and Newton, for example, in their day. That's not really anything new, but the public funding, the fact that the public is very much involved in the project can affect things. And science is human beings, but I also think there's a natural tendency, because science is such a powerful tool, that if someone is a scientist, there's almost a kind of assumption that you can ascribe to that person a greater sense of authority and even a greater capacity to think, covering other subjects. So someone might be an amazing geophysicist, and then you ask him about, what he thinks about certain economic policy when he knows nothing about it, and he might give an opinion, and then people.
Einstein, for example, was very aware of that. I mean, he said, because Einstein commented on social questions also, and he said he knows that this is not his area of expertise, but he's also a citizen, not only a physicist, so he will not shut up about that, knowing very well that he is not an economist or something, right? So he was at least aware that when he comments on other issues, he doesn't have the same authority as when it comes to relativity or quantum physics. And also, very interesting, I think, many people these days, they just go opinion shopping. So there are, for example, physicists who are pro-nuclear power, and there are physicists who are against nuclear power. So what does the media do? They only cite people who are against nuclear power and who grew up in a leftist community somewhere in Western Germany during the 70s. Of course, they have a bias against that. That doesn't mean that physics tells us nuclear power is bad. And in terms of climate physics, for example, or climate science or studies or whatever, it's not. They did that even in an institutionalized form. They uninvited people from conferences that were about this topic who had a different opinion, and then afterwards they said, aha, 97% of scientists agree. It's ridiculous, of course. They excluded the other ones or bullied them out of their clique to begin with.
Yeah. And I gotta say, of all the things, that probably is the thing that makes me the most depressed about the whole issue. Well, these many issues, particularly science, that even in the natural sciences, and I'm not even talking about biology or things related to that, but things that, well, obviously everything has to do with physics and chemistry and biology, but things that don't have anything to do with human beings explicitly, that there's increasingly a political angle to everything. It makes me very skeptical that we're going to make any real progress. Well, I guess it was inevitable. I don't want to talk too much about it because I find it pretty bland and boring, but that recent video by Urban T about...
this is why you said skeptical. That was the right keyword here.
Yeah, well, I've had, I'll leave comments sometimes on these skeptics videos, and I say, well, look, I don't think the skeptics are skeptical of anything, and I'm usually just told to sort of get the fuck out or whatever, but it was
cute, I think. Yeah.
It was just, and here's the thing, I used to talk to Crowden T, because I used to think he was an alright guy, but he's got a huge ego, and one that is, it'd be like me making this huge video about quantum mechanics when I know almost nothing about it, which is true.
You know what you could do? You could invite me and say, the physicist said actually,
and but I mean,
borrow knowledge here.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was
But
a terrible
why
video.
do
Anyone
it?
who's any basic knowledge of genetics, I have some decent knowledge in it. But even just the way he was going about it, and just also just bad reasoning. For example,
It's completely ridiculous. this video.
the inferential, for example, towards the end where he just repeats, "Don't need to know the gene," and I'm just thinking, well, do you know what inductive reasoning is? But anyway, it was really bad.
The precise genes about many other things where no one
But
has
it's
any
obviously
doubt.
the point is
There is
there's
a
obviously a
strong
genetic
genetic
component.
component,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
And so there are at least 20 levels on which I could attack this video. It's wrong on not only one level.
but
it's
already
wrong
people
on
have done it
so
already.
many levels, but
Alternative Hypothesis did it. A bunch
yeah,
of people
we
did
don't
it.
have to
Doesn't
do that
really.
here. Yeah.
But I guess what I was, I was citing that as an example of just extreme bias.
Yeah.
So one thing, and I've actually been considering getting Ryan Falk on for a discussion about this, that I find is an interesting question, is a sort of cold winters hypothesis, which I actually don't believe in increasingly, not because I think it's implausible, because the time span is too great. I've looked at more recent research that suggests that there can actually be fairly great leaps in cognitive ability spanning only a few hundred years, given sufficient eugenic breeding patterns.
Oh yeah.
There was an article, part of a book called The 10,000 Year Experiment by Guy Cochran, who's an anthropologist, physicist, a natural history of Ashkenazi intelligence, which explains in detail how in approximately 800 years you can go from an average intelligence to, just by fractions over generations. And then there was the mass execution of criminals in England. I think there's just more plot. I find the cold winters theory interesting. But I guess these are good examples of questions that are not, you can't even ask these questions.
Yeah.
Because they're not...
they close their eyes and say, la la la, I don't see anything.
Yeah. For example, one of the reasons, you don't see any high civilization in Northern Europe until much, much later, after the Romans and Greeks. So I think that's actually an implausible theory. Not because I think it's crazy, it's just, it could be true, but I just think it probably happened later. But it definitely makes sense in the sense that planning for 4 months at a time to survive when you don't have when you can't plant crops effectively makes sense. And also the other thing that I thought, this is as someone who has a personal interest and some knowledge about selection pressures and environment, you can assume that differentiated environments are going to produce identical outcomes. You're going to get, even in similar environments, you're going to, across different parts of the world, you're going to get different outcomes. So it was a terrible video. But obviously the guy was really biased, and obviously Kraut kind of embodies he's not making videos because he's interested in the science. Sorry, phone went off. In the science, or really even in the knowledge. He's making videos.
The title of the video, Group X is too dumb for Y. These skeptics always make these videos. Who doesn't get this, and who has the wrong ideas about that?
Right.
This is not that they're interested in the questions. Come on.
That's why if you back when his original video about the whole R&K, I made an R&K video too. It was completely different format. Obviously, I was really just trying to basically describe the science and how it's progressed with life history theory, etc., and how it's that generally is a better model for describing things. But it didn't really. I wasn't attacking anyone specifically, at least. And that's what I don't. He's part of this sort of, at least on the internet, the sort of ponage culture of, I'm going to go pwn this person, and if I pwn him, it's going to look really good.
These people annoy me without end, especially when they use science as some kind of pornographic element in their whole argument. Just the pace at which he changed these background images of scientific diagrams and drawings and tables. It's just, look, I looked at complicated stuff. It's ridiculous.
The strange thing too is, based on some earlier conversations I've had with him, I think his parents are geneticists. Actually, maybe I might be completely wrong. I seem to have that in recollection. He could just ask his parents about this stuff.
So is it a freak accident of mutation, or was it a paternity fraud? Maybe
I honestly don't know, but he's an example of a guy who's just willing to look. I don't think everyone is free from this. I think alternative hypotheses and occasionally made mistakes as well. And I also think that he's ideologically driven, if I'm perfectly honest, although I think he tries to stick with the data much more. So, but Crowd is just this representative of the guy, the sort of liberal guy who just will use science, as he put, as a bludgeon or a hammer to... It was pretty awful. But there are a lot of people like that also in the public sphere. Scientists this, scientists that. As long as the science kind of, well, can sort of make sense. And one thing that I think Ryan Falk, the alternative hypothesis, pointed out, which I thought was a pretty valid point, is this shift that, because the guy at least misrepresented quantitative genetics, and whereas molecular genetics is a much earlier stage. I mean, it's just not as developed as quantitative genetics, to use this as a kind of science of the gaps, which I think will be filled up increasingly as time goes by. And my concern, obviously, is we need people to be able to do good science relatively free from ideological constraints. I think as more and more scientific information regarding genetics progresses, there's going to be, well, increasing conflict, and there won't be enough sort of science of the gaps to explain things. At some point in time, people will shockingly have to accept that, you know, people are different from each other, and it's not the end of the world, right? It's not as if they didn't notice that the one guy who was, 190 centimeters and the other guy who was 171, people weren't different, but hey, that might be news for them. But
yeah, this is a point I really want to also stress here, if you give me the opportunity.
Sure.
I mean, as much as I think that these differences are real, like between the sexes, between different population groups, it is not the most defining or most important thing in life. I mean, there is a cult about intelligence, for example. It's really, IQ is hyped up to be this all important quantity. Yeah, it is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but it is not helpful, or it's not productive. It's not healthy, I guess, to look at populations or look at society or people and groups only in terms of these factors and these differences. The thing that makes me so sad is that when people don't allow discourse and arguments over these very real differences anymore, they almost give out the appearance, and they do that for moral reasons. They almost make it look like it would be the end of the world if we were different, and that
Absolutely.
If we actually found out that Europeans have higher IQs than sub-Saharan Africans, of course we need to put them in camps. What do you think? It's ridiculous. Yes, we are different, but that does not mean that we should in any shape or form commit atrocities or something. Nobody said that. Yeah? Okay, some people said that, but I'm also against those people. The thing is, I work in a factory, for example. I work with very low IQ people, and we use them productively. And they are good people. They're good members of society. Yes, they will never be able to understand quantum physics or even biology, but they are good people. They have lower IQs, and it's fine. Yeah? The same with women. They don't get certain things. They will never take responsibility, maybe, but this is nature. Yeah? We have to deal with that. That doesn't mean that we put them in camps, okay? So what makes me so sad is that the left almost acts as if the existence of these differences would mean that we have to put them in camps. There are these differences, but we can live with them. It's okay.
The thing is actually is that nothing changes once you openly acknowledge. I mean, for example, what if I think the reality is or acknowledge that there's something. Obviously, there are a few other issues. There are cultural issues. There are issues of geography, but let's just say on average, sub-Saharan Africans aren't as smart as your average European or Northeast Asian or whatever. what's going to happen? Well, nothing, because it's going to be the same thing that's been the case for decades. We're not, by acknowledging that, it's not going to improve
it's not like they
or get
perform
worse.
better because we think they have the same IQs.
Yeah, exactly. That's never been the case. Thinking that everybody's the same has never been effective in making them the same, or at least allowing them to approximate the same performance ability. But I just don't. I guess I don't really see the big deal. Now, there could be, I think, theoretical consequences in an increasingly automated society. Actually, I'm going to be making a video about this soon, sort of cognitive elite, something that Charles Murray talks about. But it's still not the end of the world. I mean, at some point in time, you got to acknowledge these things, right? I mean, when the amount of evidence, I mean, it's going to reach the stage, particularly in the biosciences, particularly in genetics, but in bioscience in general, where people are just they're as you put it, sort of living two lives. In the public, they'll say things that are completely wrong, and then they go to the lab to do actual work, and it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde almost. They're doing the real work in the lab, and they go out in the public and they just lie their teeth off, their face off. And I just don't understand why we can't get to that stage where we just say, oh, people are different. Because we all know that people are different because we grew up with people that were different from us, that were taller or more beautiful or smarter or dumber, or some people had red hair and other people had black hair, and most people have brown eyes, some people have light eyes. Yeah.
So some went to school performing really well with little effort, and some people, despite very hard work, couldn't get high marks. We also know that from school.
Yeah, it's just obvious people are different. So acknowledging at the population, but that's okay to say individually, but at the population level, I mean, there are people who will say, I think Ryan Falk would be one of them, you have these population level differences, hence we need a white ethno-state. I actually don't agree with that, but some people will think that. But I think most people would just say, okay, that's the way it's always been. So, you could. I do think, though, that we need to be, as a society, increasingly aware of IQ differences, because there will be this automation coming and other things, but. Also question whether or not, Jordan Peterson's talked about that, people in a certain spectrum of IQ or intelligence, whatever, simply can't do anything. I think he told the story about how some guy wasn't even, I guess, bright enough to distinguish the lettering on envelopes that was in French or English. And he didn't know any French, so pretty obvious what, that sort of thing. And, so I think there might be some discussions people could have, but people are different. I guess the real question will be always the question of what people do with that. And the question for decades is, we can do this, we can do welfare programs, but I don't think it's been very effective. That's why I think that there could be actual consequences if people publicly acknowledge things. But then again, even with real evidence, that I don't think, I've said this a million times, but nobody thinks the welfare state's an effective tool in, I don't know, encouraging the family unit, say in black communities.
It's a very effective tool to make the problems worse, I think.
Right.
It's a dysgenics mechanism.
But the system and the program that's been in place now for decades is so entrenched and so heavy that it doesn't matter. You could, I'm just making this up, but you could, produce mathematical proofs that it didn't work, and supported by the greatest mathematicians alive, and then they would say, it doesn't matter. This is how we just do it. It's basically the German, man macht es halt so, right? And then, so
we're used to it, But I think when more and more people come into Europe and they don't contribute, and from living side by side with them, we get even the non-scientifically trained people become more aware of the apparent differences between population groups when it comes to certain averages.
Yep.
And I think the tolerance for this gigantic welfare state that benefits these newly arrived people to such a large degree will diminish, I think. So people will just not be, well, they will not be okay with doing that anymore, and the political pressure will rise. So I see turbulent times ahead, and of course I'm not the first to say that. I don't say that the first time either, but it's fairly obvious that things will change.
Yeah, well, it's certainly possible. I remember reading that report, hearing about that report from some Dutch guy who was returning from, I believe it was the Czech Republic, in any event, coming back to some major station, train station in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and just wondering if it was unrecognizable. Maybe
the Dutch people.
Well, yeah, I mean it's the same. My friend that was helping me move, the liberal guy, he was joking. He said, "Well, he was joking, but also, if you move to Hungary, there won't." He said something like the fact that there won't be any foreigners anymore, or something to that effect. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that isn't an appeal per se to me. I mean, although Germany is kind of this. Whatever. Germany's kind of gone, but I think. Well, I do think I don't increasingly mostly because of personal stress here, but. I just don't really enjoy living in Germany anymore, but I do think it's transformed a great deal. We were talking before about how difficult it was to find housing. I live in a major city, and no doubt that the immigration policies in Germany have had an effect on that. And yeah, I don't know. I think if I did consider living in Germany at some point, maybe I'd go someplace like Mecklenburg-Vorpommern because it's in the middle of nowhere, and it's kind of.
You can live on a farm in Brandenburg, maybe.
Yeah. I'm good for farm living.
So what I could say about that is there is upward pressure on the housing market. So, for example, in former decades. The state was doing a lot of social housing projects for not homeless people or welfare recipients, but just for people who had a lower income, and then they would qualify for renting an apartment there. Yeah, that was fine. The government made sure that even people with lower incomes, it wasn't the nicest area, of course, but they had an okay apartment. And this doesn't happen anymore. All that space is now confiscated. All this is used to house even more immigrants and their families. And the people who can just so afford it, maybe they spent 30% of their disposable income for these apartments before. Now they have to spend 60% of their disposable income for their rent, and the people who would be in those apartments before, now they are one tier above in income. They have to also spend more of their disposable income, and so everybody pays more for rent or for housing in the end. And because there is this large group of the bottom of society who was brought in, who doesn't pay anything, and who is in all these apartments now, and this creates an upward pressure through the entire level structure of class and of apartments and on the housing market, and this is what we see. And the other effect is that a lot of young people, the breeding grounds of the Germans are, of course, the suburban areas and the small towns and the villages in more rural areas, but these young people then, they want to get the flashy jobs in the city. Of course, they're also influenced by media programs, maybe like Sex and the City or something, or any kind of soap opera that plays in a hip town like Cologne or Düsseldorf. They want to go to these places. So, and they're young students, they can't afford shit, but they want to live in the center of a very rich city. How does that work?
Well, it's not even that. I remember when I was still looking, this was practically the suburbs of the city I live in, and I arrived there in sort of a queue to view the place, and then there were 20 other people, including a daughter and her father, and they driven all the way from way out there, and it was reasonably expensive, and all these people interested in living there. Yeah.
The parents pay for it, then that's what the outcome is normally.
Well, yes, but not just
that. Or they heckle and petition the government to
well,
give
not just that. It's just that
housing.
There was a kind of what I thought was really weird about the whole process was that I'm self-employed. How that just didn't seem like a good thing to almost anyone. And the only way it was a complete kind of fluke almost that I got the place, which isn't that great that I'm living in now, is because my French is reasonably fluent. Because when I showed up here, where I'm living now, to the viewing, the guy, he was just like French in every way. I saw his name and so I just, usually if I speak a language, I'll just try to speak to the people. Although I recently been trying to get that Quebecois guy on, and he got insulted that I was trying to speak French. I don't know why, but anyway. And so I spoke for the entire relationship of getting the current apartment was conducted in French, and I think that's why he basically put in the good word with me with the landlady, because there were other candidates, but none of them spoke. So it wasn't because of my job, or it was just because I happen to speak French. That's great. So it's like, this guy's cool. He speaks French. So there's nothing to do with I'm good for the money, or I had a letter of recommendation from my former landlord. For 6 years I never missed it. It was he speaks French. He's cool. I mean, lots of things in life are like that, but the process was just so bizarre, and really didn't used to be that way. I remember it wasn't always like that in Germany, but it just seems a lot more difficult, which is why I'm kind of happy I found a place at all, because I thought I was that close. I was that close to giving up and saying, you know what, I'm just going to move back to the States for a while, try to figure something out. Although I couldn't afford to live there, but still, I'd figure something out. I think it's going to get worse and worse too.
Yeah, I think landlords become more and more wary, or they try to be very careful who to rent out the apartment to. And in times like these, when you're not a German, when you don't have a steady job at a large corporation, or you work for the government, or you're ordinarily employed, standard employment, people are kind of suspicious, I have to say. And in some, it varies with town and state, of course, but in many places I can't even blame them for that. Too many.
Well, I'm not necessarily blaming them.
But it sucks, of course. It sucks. Yeah.
But I'll give you an example thing when I was looking that they would, I'd show up to basically a hole in the wall. It would be renovated, but because it was convenient. And I don't have special needs really. I basically just need a room where I can kind of crash, and then just do my work on the computer or whatever. I'm like, okay, I'll take it. And they were actually asking for something like 60% less than my current rent at the time. And then they chose some student over me, or I don't know. It was just very strange. I totally understand the I guess the reluctance and the caution of certain people these days. In fact, that's what my landlady told me when I met her. She said, well, you'd be shocked, because I thought, well, look at my track record. I'm good, reliable. But yeah, she said, well, you have no idea the experiences I've had. And so, okay, fair enough. So yeah, I understand that, but I think if the immigration crisis hadn't happened, my efforts. Well, actually, put it this way: if the immigration crisis hadn't happened, if immigration as a rule had just been for years now decreased, I think my time to find a place would have been a lot easier.
Definitely,
and probably cheaper too. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely that's definitely a struggle. And then. And we were talking privately about this. I don't know if German bureaucracy is worse than other bureaucracies, but in my experience it is, just going through different things. But yeah, I guess it's different depending on where you live and the state you live in and all these other things. But one thing I'm sure of is that all this mass immigration, I have not received any personal benefit from it at all. So, in fact, it's made certain aspects of my life, like, for example, looking for a new place, more difficult.
Well, they didn't have people like us in mind as beneficiaries when they when they put in place these policies. We are not meant to benefit from that. So
I'm trying to figure out who is meant to benefit from it, though. That's the thing. It's
people who own houses, for example.
People who, yeah. I mean, yeah, and the Immobilienmakler, I guess real estate agents, they must love it. It's just a seller's market. They can have so much choice. They can do whatever they want.
And when they put migrants in there, the government pays them, and the government always pays.
Yeah.
They pay a lot. Some people get rich with that. Just taking an old farm and renovating a little bit and then putting migrants in there, they become millionaires. Yeah. So, and also, it's also the Caritas. Do you know the Caritas?
No, I know Caritas.
Diakonie. I mean, Caritas has, I think, about 1 million employees in Germany, and
really?
They just ran out of people to care for. Just for the audience, maybe Caritas is a Catholic welfare organization, basically. So they are partly church, but they also get a lot of government money, and they have stuff like kindergartens, houses for the elderly, they have hospitals, and they care for people, and they just ran out for people to care for, because Germany normally doesn't produce so many welfare cases, but they want to grow, they want to expand, they need to grow their business. So they thought, we get people who can take care of themselves, people who will forever be dependent on the state and on welfare. That sounds like a lucrative deal for us. So of course they're for that.
Yeah, it's kind of an unintentional conspiracy of joint interest to maintain the status quo. That's always the case. Same thing with
they maintain their power and their jobs are secure for the future.
I say this about the American drug war all the time, that nobody thinks it's actually effective. They have not thought that for decades, but maybe the odd person, but there are hundreds of thousands of employees working for the U.S. government involved in dealing with and confiscating and fighting the quote-unquote drug war. So we'll just keep that going. And what can you do about that? I guess the final question I'd ask is, is it too late for Germany?
Oh God. What can I say? I mean, depends on what you mean with Germany, really. I mean, sure, we will survive somehow in some weird pocket of the globe, but for the current state, the Federal Republic of Germany, I think it will not be able to survive in its current form, at least. And maybe there will be a Balkanization, maybe there will be another 30 years war or something like that, civil war possibly. There are definitely areas here, territories where other factions but the local inhabitants would have no chance if no foreign power intervenes. So just from what we have in Germany here, there is no hope for them. In other areas, there is hope for them. And but I would say they are located in the city centers largely, and that could turn out to be a huge disadvantage for them when it comes to war. But maybe if we don't even have to go that far, I think once our economy just has a little bit of a hiccup, for example, we're very strong on the internal combustion engine and the automotive industry, not only making cars, but also the entire industry, down the supply chain that deals with providing the machines and the parts for making cars. If that would decrease, not even crash, but just stagnate or decrease, that could be a big problem. I mean, taxes are exploding in Germany at the moment. Since the crash, 2007, 2008, it was one boom year after the other, and there have never been as many taxes collected in
And
Germany.
my insurance
as
costs
right
go
now.
up every year too.
Yeah, of course. Because instead that our government would balance the budget or pay back some debt, what they do is they just leverage it even more, and they make more new debt, and they find new little projects where they can spend the money. Yeah, they want to give money to Africa. They want to bring Africa here. It's just, if you give them more money, they spend 10 times the amount. Yeah? So when the high taxes means that we are getting deeper into that hole. So actually lower tax revenue would actually be good, but now we have accumulated so many welfare cases and so much entitlement here already that it will not go peacefully, I think, at this moment. Yeah? If the tax stream will get thinner.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to be making a video about this. I'm skeptical of a kind of mass or even small level armed conflict theory that I hear often from different circles. Well, I'll probably go about in the video, but certainly in my view, Germany is not. Maybe it never was, but certainly Germany's not what it used to be. The Lande, Denker und Henker. Well, maybe if it had ever been
Dichter und Denker.
Yeah, exactly.
But Denker and Henker is not a bad thing, so.
Or there was another one, Dichter und Richter, that was the other one.
Yeah, that's also good. I like both.
Dichter und Richter.
You should have Henker und Richter. That would be great, huh?
But then it doesn't rhyme, so.
Yeah.
Anyway. So Germany is just not. It just seems to just be less and less the good things that I used to be able to appreciate Germany. I just feel really. It's kind of a shock. I feel very foreign in Germany in a strange way. Not just that I'm a foreigner in Germany. I've always been that, but almost like I'm the wrong type of foreigner. Certainly my experience looking for a place gave me that sense. I think if my name were Mohammed or Ahmed, it might have gone better, in fact. But there. Yeah, I feel increasingly completely out of place in Germany. When I used to sort of feel, well, I'm not German, but I can appreciate X, Y, Z. Now I just feel like I just don't really want to be. I know I'm just complaining. I'm working on getting out. So people say, well, just leave. It's not that simple. But
I understand it perfectly. I mean, I feel like a foreigner in Germany many times. Always have, I think. But sometimes I experience these nice little gestures or moments that make me feel at home in a pub, like when a stranger just starts talking to me and we talk about recent events and say goodbye politely, or when, for example, I have personal relationships with the people in my small town where I live. These are little moments where I really feel at home, but I know that this is just this special pocket of Germany, or this special area maybe where you have that still. It's a more rural area, but maybe I'm also emotionally invested in my country. Of course, I love my culture, I love my country, and of course I don't wanna admit maybe that it's not gonna last. But yeah, sometimes
certainly the cities are gone.
To just daydream and think, oh, how nice is this here? This little
the
old
cities
baker.
Don't resemble any.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of German cities.
Well, you're right not to be.
They're not German. Maybe they have never been.
It's possible they've never been German.
Yeah.
I've lived in German cities and in German towns. I've lived in both. I lived in actually Swabian and Bavarian towns that were quite nice.
Excellent.
Yeah, I've lived in Eastern Germany. I've lived in Western Germany. I've lived kind of almost all over Germany, and yeah, the cities are definitely, well, especially these days, just not very German. Other than maybe some people speak German, but apart from that, some people. Well, it's not uncommon. I see, especially recently, I had to drag my ass to the insurance office to take care of pointless bureaucracy that they created for me. That they'll have these, I don't know if they're I don't know what they are, but these people who bring interpreters with them, and that's how they basically get by for stuff like that. And then
paid for by yours truly.
No, I think they're
No?
family
Okay.
members in some cases
Ah,
who
okay,
can,
okay.
you
So
know,
it's
just
not
kind of.
state issued
No,
interpreters because they get that. Yeah.
Oh, they do. Okay, I didn't know that. They
Yeah,
get.
yeah.
It's usually family members who, you know,
Oh, in that
relay
case, it's great if they can
information.
do that. Yeah.
Well, it is, I guess, but I don't know. It's I think in general, Western Europe is effectively gone in any sense, traditional sense of what it was, and I think it will decrease. Increasingly decrease. That doesn't make such sense, but increasingly get worse because all the things that led to the current destabilized state of affairs are still in place. They're getting worse. No, I mean, some people talk about opposing it, but let's be real. A lot of the stuff that we see that worries about this out loud is just sort of internet noise, right?
Yeah.
It's not. It's on the ground. There are no policies for that, and nobody talks about these things. So, yeah, what can you do?
A little sign of hope that I see is that the young generation, even though they don't speak out about that because they're just too young, but they seem like they become more and more conservative overall. And it's not so. It's not about these big political questions. It's seemingly innocent little questions like they don't eat at McDonald's so much anymore. They eat bratwurst again. It's unimportant stuff, you might think, but they get a feeling, and maybe they don't understand it intellectually, but they are more drawn to German things now. That's what I see here, at least. And maybe in a big city it might be different, but here I can see, because they see that stuff in the news also, and they like it here, where Germany is still quote-unquote okay. And they identify more and more with German culture and the German nation. So it seems like things are drifting apart. And in some areas, the young people become actually more identitarian, more nationalistic. Actually.
Well, I think you saw a bit of that during the American election. I mean, the people who voted for Trump are overwhelmingly not from the city or urban areas, much more rural areas as a rule. And yeah, it's obvious why there's that connection in more rural areas or smaller towns, because, well, yeah, I mean, in smaller towns, you don't typically have, you know, das Türkenviertel or whatever. So it would make sense that, you know, it'd be easier for people to identify with that sort of thing. Speaking of which, I haven't had German food in a long time. I probably should have some. You can't have it too often.
Should, yeah.
In my experience, but every now and then, something like a nice Sauerbraten with mit Rotkraut
Und Klößen.
Nee.
More the Spätzle guy.
Nicht mal. I was thinking Sauerbraten mit Rotkohl und Apfelstücken. Ja. Yeah, that's my thing. That's my thing. Yeah, and
great,
maybe something like a Kloß, or I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Some kind of Kartoffel thingy.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for most German food. I mean,
I
really
like German food. I just find it too heavy.
Yeah.
So it's not something I can have on any regular basis. But if I go a couple of months without having it, I might swing by a more traditional. I don't drink beer, but I'll order myself a Sauerbraten, or, well, I'm not really the Schnitzel kind of guy, but definitely some of the more traditional things. Well, Sauerbraten's my favorite, so that's the one that comes to mind. But anyway, I think you gotta get going soon, and
it's a good.
Yeah. So
that was
everyone,
a good last topic, I think.
yeah, everyone, thanks for tuning in, and I will hopefully upload this soon, and I think Red Pill will upload it on his channel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure. Bye bye.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.